Chapter 43, showing how Don Florestan was the son of King Perion by fair damsel, daughter to the Count of Selandia. This valiant and hardy knight, Don Florestan, you should know how and in what land he was begotten, and by whom. Know then that when King Perion, being a young man and of good heart, sought adventures, he passed 2 years in Germany, doing great deeds in arms. And as he was returning with great glory to his own land, he lodged one day with the Count of Selandia, there where he was right worshipfully entertained, and at night he was shown to a rich bed, and there, being weary with his journey, he fell asleep. Ere long he felt a damsel embrace him, and her mouth joined to his, and, waking thereat, was drawing back, but she cried out, "How is this, sir? Would you rather be alone in the bed?" The king then looked at her by his chamber light, and saw the fairest woman that he had ever saw. "Tell me," quoth he, "who are you?" She answered, "One that loves you, and gives you her love." "First tell me your name." "Why do you distress me with the question?" "I must know. I am the count's daughter." Then the king said, "It becomes not a woman of your rank to commit this folly. I tell you I will do no wrong to your father." "Ah," quoth she, "ill betide those who praise your goodness. You are the worst man in the world, and the most discourteous. What goodness can there be when you thrust away a fair lady of such lineage?" King Perion answered, "I shall do that which is to your honor and my own, not what would injure both." Then quoth she, "I will do that which shall grieve my father more than if you consent to my will." And she leapt up and took King Perion's sword, that same sword which was laid in the ark with Amadis, and unsheathed it, and placed the point against her heart. "Will not my father grieve more for my death?" When the king saw that, he was greatly astonished, and he sprang from the bed, crying, "Hold! I will perform your will." And he snatched the sword from her, and that night she became pregnant. On the morrow Perion departed, and never saw her more. She, so long as she could, concealed her situation, and when the time drew nigh, contrived to go visit her aunt with one damsel. But as she was passing through a forest, her pains came upon her, and she alighted from her palfrey, and there brought forth the son. The damsel, seeing her in this plight, put the baby to her breast. "Now, lady," said she, "the same courage that you showed in sinning, show now in supporting yourself till I return." And then she mounted her palfrey, and rode on as fast as she could to the aunt's castle, and told her all that had happened. The dame was greatly troubled, yet delayed not for that to succor her, but went forth with a litter, wherein she used to visit her brother to shade her from the sun. And when she saw her niece, she alighted, and wept with her, and had her placed with the infant in the litter, and taken by night into the castle, and enjoined secrecy to all who were with her. So the mother returned after her recovery to the count's castle, and nothing was known of what had passed, and the boy was educated till he was of 18 years, a braver youth, and better limbed than any other in the district. And the dame his aunt, seeing this, gave him horses and arms, and took him to the count to knight him, who knew not whom he was knighting was his own grandson. As they were returning, the dame told him the secret of his birth, and said he ought to go seek his father, and make himself known to him. "Certes, lady," quoth he, "but I have heard often of her King Perion, but never thought he was my father. But by the faith I owe God, and to you who have brought me up, neither he nor any one else shall know who I am, till they can say that I am worthy to be the son of so good a man." Then, taking his leave, he went with 2 squires to Constantinople, where he heard there was a cruel war. There he remained 4 years, and did such deeds in arms as never knight had wrought before in those parts, so that at the end of that time he was determined to go and discover himself to his father. But as he drew nearer France, he heard the fame of Amadis and Gaylor, who were now beginning to work wonders, so that he changed his intentions, and resolved to gain more honor in Great Britain, where there were more good knights than in any other part of the world, and that he would not make himself known till his prowess had given him sufficient renown, in which mind he continued till his combat with Gaylor, as you have heard. Amadis and Argives remained 5 days at the castle of Torin. Then, all things being prepared, they set forth with Briolanda and her aunt, who took them with 2 damsels and 5 serving men on horseback and 3 palfreys laden with apparel, for Briolanda went in black and would wear nothing else till her father's death was avenged. As they began their journey, Briolanda requested a boon of Amadis, and her aunt another of Argives, the which they granted, without knowing what it might be. They then demanded that, let what would happen, the knights should not leave the road, so that their present quest might not be interrupted. Much did they repent their promise, and great shame did they endure thereby, for in many places was their succor needed, and rightly might they have bestirred themselves, if they had been at liberty. Thus they travelled 12 days before they entered the kingdom of Sobradisa. It was night when they reached it. They left the high road and struck by a byway for 3 leagues, and then, great part of the night being past, they came to a little castle where a lady dwelt named Galumba, who had served in the court of the king, Briolanda's father. She right joyfully admitted them, and set supper before them, and provided their night's entertainment, and the next morning asked the aunt whither they were going. A joyful woman she was, hearing that those knights were going to revenge her master's death. But I fear, said she, lest the traitor should destroy them by some deceit. For that reason, said the old lady, I am come to consult with you. Leave it to me, quoth Galumba. She then took ink and parchment, and wrote a letter, and sealed it with Briolanda's seal, and gave it to a damsel, and directed her what she should do. The damsel mounted her palfrey, and rode on till she came to the great city of Sobradisa, from whence the whole kingdom took its name. She went directly to the palace of Abios, and rode through the gate, being richly apparelled. The knight came around to assist her to dismount, but she said, no. She would not alight till the king saw her, and commanded her to do so. They then took her bridle, and led her into the hall where the king was, with his sons and many other knights, and he bade her alight, if she had anything to say. She answered, I will, sir, on condition that you protect me, and that I shall suffer no injury for anything that I may say against you, or against any other here. The king assured her that she would be under his protection and royal faith, and bade her deliver what she was come to say. Upon that she alighted, and said, Sir, I bring a message which must be delivered in the presence of all the chiefs of your realm. Summon them, and it shall be made known. Quoth Abios, It is as you would wish. They were already in my court, and have been assembled on business these 6 days. Call them together, said she. Forthwith they were summoned, and being all met, the damsel then said, King, Briolanda, whom you disinherited, sends you this letter to be read before this assembly. When Abios heard the name of his niece, he was touched with shame, remembering the wrong he had wrought her. Yet the letter was openly read, which was to give credit to the damsel's words. To this he only replied that they were not to believe what the damsel said on Briolanda's behalf, but the people of the realm who were there present were moved with great compassion at the name of their lawful lady, who was so unjustly dispossessed, and they besought God secretly that he would no longer suffer so great a treason to remain unpunished. Give your errand, quoth the king. Sir king, said the damsel, it is true that you killed the father of Briolanda, and have disinherited her of her kingdom, and you have often declared that you and your sons would justify what you have done by force of arms. Briolanda now sends to say that if you hold your word, she will bring here 2 knights who undertake to battle in her cause, and make you know your treason and great tyranny. When Darason, the eldest son, heard this, he arose in great anger, being of a hot nature, and without his father's permission replied, Damsel, if Briolanda has these knights, I promise the combat for myself, and for my father and my brother, and if I do not perform this, I promise before all these knights to give my head to her, that she may take it in requital of her father's. Certes, Darason, answered the damsel, you answer like a knight of great courage, yet may I doubt your words to proceed from choler, for I see you are enraged. But if you will obtain from the king an assurance of your words, I shall think they proceed from that great wrath and hardihood which are in you. What would you have, quoth he. Cause the king, she replied, to give our knights assurance that, For any mishap which you may receive in the battle, they shall sustain no injury from any in this land, nor be meddled with withal, but by you three. Give them this safe conduct, and they will be here within 3 days. Daracin knelt down before his father. You see, sir, what the damsel requests, and what I have promised, and, because my honor is yours, let it be granted, else they will without danger have put us to shame, for we have always avowed that if anyone attainted your deeds, we would justify it in battle. Even without the promise, we ought to accept defiance, for they tell me these knights are some of King Luzart's rash household, whose pride and folly makes them magnify their own worth and despise all others. The king, albeit he felt himself guilty of his brother's murder and dreaded the battle, yet, because he loved his son as he did himself, gave safe conduct as the damsel had demanded. The hour appointed by the Most High Being came. The damsel, having accomplished this, said, Hold yourself ready, for tomorrow the knights will be here. And then she mounted her palfrey and departed. Much were the ladies and the knights rejoiced at the success of her embassy. When Amadis heard that Daracin held them as fools because they were of King Luzart's household, he grew angry and exclaimed, There are those in that household who would easily break his pride, and his head too. But when he said this, he was ashamed that he had been so mastered by anger. Briolanda, who could not keep her eyes off of him, observed this, and said, You cannot, sir, either say or do anything against these traitors which they have not deserved, and worse. Have pity on me, since you know my father's murder and my wrongs. My trust is in God and in you. Amadeus, whose heart was submiss to virtue and all gentleness, moved with pity for that fair damsel, answered, If God so pleased, lady, I ween that ere tomorrow night your sorrow will be turned into joy. Then Briolanda would, for thankfulness, have humbled herself to have kissed his feet, but he drew back abashed, and Argives raised her up. They determined to set for ward by daybreak, and hear mass at the chapel of the Three Fountains, which was a half-league from Sobradisa. That night they made good cheer, and Briolanda, who talked much with Amadeus, was ofttimes moved to offer marriage to him, but seeing his frequent reveries, and the tears that sometimes fell down his cheeks, which she knew to proceed from no fear in his brave heart, she suspected that he loved elsewhere, and so refrained. At dawn they all departed, and arriving at the Three Fountains, heard mass from the good hermit, who, hearing therefore they were on their way, besought God to speed them well in the battle, as he knew their cause was right. They armed themselves, all save the head and hands, and so proceeded to the city. Without the walls they found King Abios and his sons, and a great company attending them. The people all flocked towards Briolanda, whom in their hearts they loved, thinking her their rightful and natural lady. Amadeus led her bridle and uncovered her face, that all might see how beautiful she was. She was weeping, and the multitude blessed her in their hearts, and prayed that she might be restored to her rights. Abisos dissembled a feeling from which neither his ambition nor his wickedness could shield him, and seeing how the people flocked round Briolanda, he exclaimed, Fools! See how you rejoice in her sight, but it is to your honor and safety that a knight like me should protect you, not a weak woman who in so long a time has only been able to get these 2 knights for her champions, whom, because they are thus deceitful, brought to their death or dishonor. I cannot forbear to pity. These words so kindled the indignation of Amadis that blood seemed starting from his eyes. He arose in his stirrups, that all might hear him, and answered, King Abios, I well see how the coming of Briolanda troubles you, because you have murdered her father, who was your king and brother. If there were yet virtue enough in you to resign to her, if there yet be virtue enough in you to resign to her what is her own, I will excuse the battle, that you may have leisure for repentance, that, though you have lost your honor in this world, you may save your soul. Before the king could reply, Darcinian exclaimed, Thou foolish knight of the King Luzart's court! I never thought I could endure to hear a speech like thine. Come on, and if your heart fails you, you cannot fly where I cannot reach you with such a vengeance that none can behold it without compassion. Arm thyself, traitor, and do battle, quoth Argives. Daracin answered, Say what thou wilt. Presently I will send thy tongue without thy body to King Luzart's court, as a warning to all such fools. They then armed themselves, and Amadeus and Argives laced their helmets, and took their shields and spears, and entered the place that had been of yore marked out for such trials. Dramus, the second son, who was so good a knight that no two knights of that country could keep the field against him, said to his father, Sir, where you and my brother are present, I might well be excused from speaking, but now I have to act with what strength I have, which I have received from God and you. Leave that knight who has reviled you to me. If I do not slay him with the first lance thrust, may I never again bear arms. Or if it be his good fortune that the spear does not strike right, the first blow with the sword shall do it. There were many who heard this speech, and did not think it vain boasting. He was of such exceeding strength. Darcinian looked around the lists. How is this? Quoth he. Ye are but two. Hath the heart of the third failed him? Come to him directly, for we will not tarry. Trouble not yourself about the third, said Amadis. You will presently wish the second away. Now look to your defence. They placed their shields before them, and gave their horses the rein. Dramus ran right at Amadis, and pierced his shield, and broke his lance against his side. But Amadis smote him so roughly that the spear went through his shield, and without piercing his breastplate, burst his heart within him, and he fell like the fall of a tower. In God's name, cried Ardian the dwarf, my master's deed is better than his word. The other twain ran at Argives, and he and Darcinian broke their lances upon each other, and both kept their seats. Abios failed in his course. He saw Dramus on the ground, and in great grief, albeit he did not suppose him to be dead, ran full at Amadis, and pierced his shield, and broke the lance in his arms, so that all thought he could not continue the battle. Well may you think how Briolanda felt at that. Her heart sunk, and the sight of her eyes failed her, and without support she would have fallen from her palfrey. But he, who was not to be dismayed at such wounds, grasped well that good sword which had so lately recovered from Archelaus, and struck Abios upon the helm. Through the helm it went, and slanting down the head, and pierced into the shoulder, a slant wound, but so staggering that Abidos tottered on his seat, and fell half senseless. Then he of Gaul rode up to Darcinian, who was close engaged with Argives. Now, Darcinian, you have raised the second where absent, than that third here were come. Argives cried out to him to hold. Cousin, you have done enough. Leave this man who has threatened to cut out my tongue. Amadis did not hear him. He had made a blow which sliced off a part of the shield, and came through the pommel of the saddle to the horse's neck. But Darcinian, as he ran past, ran his sword into the belly of Amadis's horse. The horse instantly ran away. The reins broke in the rider's hands, and Amadis, seeing that he had no remedy, and that he should be carried out of the lists, struck the beast between the ears with his sword, and split his head, the fall bruising him sorely, but he arose, and turned to Abios. At this time Argives had driven his sword into Darcinian's helmet, so that he could not recover it. Darcinian had forced it from his hand, and was driving at him. Argives grappled him. They fell together and struggled on the ground. Abios came up, and was lifting the skirts of his armor to thrust his sword into him. Amadis came up in time. The king was compelled to look to his own safety. He lifted his shield, and the blow dashed his shield against his helmet, and made him reel. Argives and Darcinian had loosed each other. Argives caught up Darcinian's sword. Darcinian plucked the other from his helm, and ran towards his father. Amadis saw that Argives was all bloody from a wound in his neck, and fearing it was mortal, he cried, Leave them to me, good cousin, and rest yourself. I have no wound, quoth Argives, to keep me from aiding you. See if it be so. Have at them then, cried Amadis, but the fear he felt for his cousin gave him such anger that presently his enemies, their armor all hacked, and their flesh too, began to turn here and there disorderly, and with the fear of death. So it continued till the hour of tierce, when Abios, seeing death before him, lifted his sword in both hands, and ran desperately at Amadis, and gave him a blow such as might not be looked for from a man so wounded. It cut away the brim of the helmet, and the shoulder mail, and part of the flesh with it. Amadis felt it so sorely, and did not delay to give him his wages. He struck his shoulder, and lopped off that arm with which he had murdered his own king and brother. Arm and shoulder he lopped off, and cried out, That arm brought thee by treason to the throne, and now it brings thee to death and the depths of hell. The king had fallen in the pangs of death. Amadis looked round and saw that Arges had smitten off the head of Darcinian. Then the people of the land went joyfully to kiss the hand of Briolanda, their lady. The conquerors dragged their enemies out of the lists. Amadis, though he was much wounded, would not disarm himself till he knew if there were any to gainsay Briolanda's right. But one of the chiefs of the realm, by name of Golman, came before him, and with 100 men of his lineage and household, they declared that they had only endured the usurpation of Abios because there had no remedy. Now God had delivered them. They were in that loyalty and vassalage which they owed to Briolanda. Within 8 days all of the kingdom came joyfully to do homage to her. Amadis, meantime, was laid in bed, and that fair queen never left him but when she went to sleep herself. Arges, who was dangerously wounded, was put under the care of a skilful man, who suffered none to approach him, that he might not speak, for the wound was in his throat.